Glad to be here again doing this. I always enjoy doing the ballot initiative shuffle here in California every year. The big news about me, if you haven't heard, is after 52 years in California, I gave up and moved to Florida, which hurts because I love California and I particularly love Kern County and I particularly love Tehachapi, and lived there for a long time and didn't want to leave, but got just taxed. The combination of tax hike year after year. We had a small ranch up there, and the regulatory nonsense. It's like every year there was some new crappy thing from the state, usually, and occasionally even the county, interfering with our ability to just do, simple farm life like I grew up. Just the things that I could no longer do that I did my whole life. And then my kids got ready to start college. And I'm a slightly disabled veteran. So that means my kids pay no tuition for University of California or Cal State, which is kind of crazy. Most states have that benefit for severely disabled veterans. So they give their kids a leg up since they were severely disabled in the service of their country. I've got, freaking varicose veins and a crushed disc in my back, and they're giving my kids a free ride. So first of all, I think that's dumb. But even given that, the cost of college in California at Cal State Bakersfield, or one daughter wanted to go to UC Santa Barbara, is almost twice what it costs to go in Texas or Florida or Virginia, paying full tuition. So tuition free, it's still ridiculously expensive. So all these things combined together, we decided we were out and we moved to Florida. But Reason Foundation is still located here. I'm here spending the week in Tehachapi, visiting friends and doing a lot of personal business. So we're staying close to California. And of course, I remain fascinated by the ballot initiatives. Now, Florida has ballot initiatives. But you know what? Those people are amateurs compared to California. It's kind of funny. I've started meeting with a lot of the players in Tallahassee there, which is a very, very, very different culture from Sacramento, I can tell you. But really, they don't have a clue how ballot measures really operate at the professional level like we do here. So I'm going to go through the ballot initiatives we got this year. I do this pretty much every election. To a greater or lesser extent. Because after decades, literally decades of working on these things, I discovered that one capability that my colleagues and I have is kind of the plain English approach to these things. A lot of these things are written, they're very complex in the way that they're written. The yes and no arguments seem to be very contradictory. Like, who's telling the truth? Both of these things cannot be true. Somebody is spinning, right? And so it's figuring out, well, what do they really do? And a lot of times there's a lot of rhetoric that's sort of beyond what the measure really does. And sometimes there's carefully overlooking some things that the measure really does do and not talking about those. So trying to break it down into, okay, for the regular person doing a regular job, trying to make a living and raise some kids in California, what do these things actually mean? And then I put on a layer of, well, since I've been doing this for 20 years, what do I think is actually going on here? So I'll give you sort of what I consider to be the objective sense of what the thing does, and then I'll give you my opinion. And I just want to make that distinction clear so you know what's my opinion and what's sort of a balancing of what the law actually says. All right, so the water bond. So it's a $7 billion bond. It's no small potatoes. We've done a few $10 or $11 billion bonds in our day, but most of the bonds California does tend to be smaller than this. So this is a big one. It also takes another $500 million in old bonds that we voters approved, for somewhat related purposes that they haven't got around to spending yet, and reallocates it into this bundle, so it goes into the project list that was developed for this bond. And the sort of financial bottom line is we got to pay $360 million a year over the next 40 years to pay it off. So that's the debt cost. Pretty straightforward. So the main yes arguments. Well, we have this drought, right? And water's a big, hairy issue right now. In fact, I had to tell my daughters, hey, while we're staying here this week, don't leave the sink or the shower running. We're not in Florida anymore, where the water's literally running across the ground. It's you have to think about these things here. Water has become an increasingly important issue. It's never not been important, but the politicians tend to pay attention when there's a crisis. This bond is designed to fund a bunch of surface and subsurface water infrastructure projects and a lot of related programs, all designed to sort of increase the water supply. There's a very extensive environmental overlay on the whole program. On the other side, it costs a lot of money, right? So with interest, we're talking $14.5 billion to pay for this over 40 years. That $360 million is no trivial amount out of the state's budget every year. So this is a lot of money. I think the other key no arguments, again in the plain English spirit, is these are not all state-owned infrastructure projects. There is a lot of this taxpayer bond money flowing to private parties who control various water systems or elements of water systems around the state. So there's a lot of subsidies to be slurped up here. It funds projects that will move water from the north to the south. That's very controversial. It's statewide, particularly in the north, no surprise. I think the yes side tries to avoid highlighting, there's no peripheral canal in here, but they went as close to that line as they could, in a sense, in designing these projects without actually stepping over the line. So from the perspective of people who care about that issue, it's definitely in there and shouldn't be hidden. The state has a lot of debt, and too much of the money goes to ongoing business and not actually building infrastructure. So those are the simple form of the basic yes and no arguments. Now here's what I think. This is a fiasco. This is on the order of the high-speed rail project, which I think a lot of people, there was a lot of skepticism, but there was also very explicitly, I remember being in a room much like this at the time the high-speed rail project bond was being considered, and people who normally would never support a gigantic potential white elephant project like that were like, yeah, but in this case, they may be wasting billions of dollars, but some of those billions of dollars are definitely going to be wasted here in Kern County, and so it could be a good thing for us. And I don't think it's going to work out that way, and I think the years have vindicated my opinion that this thing is just an ever more of a disaster. We're somewhat in the same boat here. It's like, well, this is a bond initiative that was written by state legislators, explicitly designed to throw money at every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the state of California. And so everybody kind of likes it because some of that money is coming your way. And that's appealing, and that's exactly what they were going for, was if we throw money at everybody, everybody will support it. But the problem is, our water needs are not dribs and drabs in every single legislative district in California. We have very concentrated water problems. So, 15 years today, the last 15 years, we have passed $15 billion in water bonds. So more than twice the amount of this water bond we have approved in the state of California over the last 15 years. I don't know if anybody in here can name a water project that was built with any of those bonds. I don't know that anybody can. Because according to the Little Hoover Commission and the federal government, California pissed away that whole $15 billion and didn't build anything. That's our track record. So I'm skeptical that throwing another $7 billion down that rat hole is going to get us any infrastructure, especially when, I should have put these bullets in a different order, especially in light of this last point, that when you read the details of the bond, it says $2 billion of this goes to build these 2 reservoirs. And then it lists all the things the money can be spent on. And almost everything on the list is not building a dam. It's doing the environmental studies. It's hiring engineers. It's all the stuff. Now, sure, it's all got to be done as part of the project. But that's the stuff you pay for out of operating funds, and you use the debt to pay for building the thing. That's how debt is supposed to work for infrastructure. And that is not what this does. Almost all of the $7 billion goes to pay for people doing things that they're already doing, not for building anything. So I can guarantee you, at least, that out of that $7 billion, no more than $2.5 billion at the far end will go to actual construction. And I think that's extraordinarily generous. I would not be surprised if a trivial amount goes to actual construction. So I'm skeptical, and especially when California has the highest level of debt in the nation. And that's because we keep passing bonds and not spending them to build things, so that we have to come back and say, guess what, we need another bond. Remember I mentioned there was $500 million in bonds left over from, money left over from old bonds that's being reallocated as part of this package? Well, wait a minute. If we're in a crisis and they're sitting on $500 million, how come they're not out there building something right now? Because that's not what they do. So building things has not been not our strong suit in California anymore, which is pretty funny when we were once the nation's leader in building infrastructure. We've lost that talent somehow. Okay, Prop 2. Should we do, where'd you go? Oh, should we do questions one by one or save them for the end? Okay, so yeah, questions on the water bond then. I'll only take a couple each time, so we'll make sure we get to the end. But
is the debt, is that based on a ratio or just total debt?
No, that's a per capita ratio. So
Per capita?
Yeah, yeah, and that's state and local, because we've gotten very creative at shifting debt from the state to the local level in recent years too. You roll in this school bonds in particular. School district debt in California is like an order of magnitude higher than any other state.
Where does the environmental lobby fall in this as far as the, I mean, it seems to me that their attorneys are getting paid well, exclusively,
right.
and that their whole job is just to stop any water from flowing or moving,
right.
Any, you know, and in the meantime, we have farmers in the South that have spent money building that infrastructure that they're unable to use.
Right.
So how does it help at all? I mean, are we going to get a trickle of water based on this cap?
Yeah, it's not surprisingly, it's a little bit complicated. So the environmental community is divided on this. I would say mostly they're against it. So if you look at who opposes this bond, it's almost only a group of environmental groups, which is kind of weird. I don't usually find myself in the position of like the only people that seem to agree with me are those guys. But they're not against it because it wastes money. They're against it because it makes it possible to move water around, right? And we can't be moving water around. But that also highlights what the problem, I mean, our problem is not primarily an infrastructure problem. Not that we don't have some really serious water infrastructure problems or a need for a couple of additional reservoirs. But, you know, it's one of those things of, if you're not using the resources you already have well, is the best thing to do to add to your resources. I mean, I would say the low-hanging fruit is making better use of the resources you already have. And I don't think we should, I don't want to call myself an environmentalist, but I don't want to wipe out any animals or critters either. But and I don't think you have to. It has to be man versus animal. We're pretty darn slick and pretty technologically savvy. We can do a lot of stuff with moving water around that doesn't have to destroy any habitat. But we're not doing that because we're not allowed to even explore those possibilities anymore. So yeah, we're missing a lot of opportunities to have more efficient allocation of water, to make better use of when to use surface water, when to use subsurface water, groundwater, and you know, move water from places. You know, there's things like Salton Sea in the Imperial Valley where there's a lot of water that could be moved with no environmental impact, but we can't do it because if we did that, that would be, you know, the toe in the door that would then allow us, well, you say, well, look, if moving water from the Imperial Valley works, then we ought to be able to move water elsewhere in the state, right? And then yeah, they don't want to open that door because they're afraid that, you know, then we will move water from the north part of the state to the south, which is the big environmental bugbear, right? So yeah, it's
well, it's the battle to even get a little bit of it has been so arduously fought,
right,
that it's.
I think it's interesting that there are a few environmental groups that support the bond, partly because I think they've made it just from reading their statements, they've come to think that if we don't start increasing the supply, the pressure, at some point people are going to say, you know what, we don't care if there's no wildlife left in California, we need some stinking water. You know, I mean, at some point things are going to get more drastic and it's going to be you know, a sub-optimizing compromise. So a number of environmental groups have said, no, look, every one of the projects identified in this has a huge percentage of the money goes to environmental protection. And that's true. All these projects have a big, you know, some of the money has to be spent on environmental protection, which does raise the cost, but it buys off, you know, a lot of these trade-offs, you know, especially on the agricultural projects. So, you know.
So being an ag community, perhaps we're not as opposed to this as we.
Yeah, right. You know, it's, but again, I would say how much, you know, there's some money is going to get thrown at some of the local districts, but what's actually going to get built, I'm pretty skeptical. So, you know, some money will flow in, but it's going to flow out too, since you all will be helping to pay for it. I'm not sure it nets out that, let me put it this way, I'm not sure it nets out that Kern County is going to have a net income from this, you know, because we all know what happens is the Bay Area, the coastal communities, LA have a real knack for siphoning off more than their fair share of this kind of bond money. And so, you know, will Kern County get out more than it pays in paying off the debt? Not obvious. All right, so Prop 2, there's the Rainy Day Fund. We've been trying to get this right in California for a long time. I think this is the 4th or 5th Rainy Day Fund ballot initiative that's been on the ballot since I started voting a few decades ago. So we keep trying at it. This one sets up a regular 1.5% of every year's budget goes into this fund. So it's you know, it's like that having the money taken out of your paycheck before you ever get it kind of savings plan, right? It also siphons the excess capital gains. So when, you know, Google does its IPO and pays a gazillion in capital gains, or whatever the next Google might be, I should say, that goes into this fund. And they're supposed to take that money each year, put half of it into paying off the debt, and half of it then stays in what you would think of as a rainy day fund. So it's not just a conventional rainy day fund. And there's some other small dribs and drabs attached to that. So this is not just a savings account, right, where the money goes in and it's held there until such a time as the state needs it. There's a lot of small trickles of money in and out because, you know, the micromanagers got their hooks into it. But the bottom line is the vast majority of the money is allocated this way, to debt and to the savings account. Now, the yes arguments are obviously built around we have a lot of volatility in our economy. We have a lot of volatility in state revenues. We don't have volatility in state spending. State spending only goes up. So when we have volatility in revenue, the legislature hates to make adjustments in spending. So they would like to have this reserve so they can have money to spend when the revenues fall without having to cut spending. Because it allocates half to the debt, it starts paying down our highest debt level in the United States per capita. And you know, they argue that if you've got this money, then we won't have to pass temporary tax increases every time there's a recession, right? Has anybody met a temporary tax increase in California? Yeah, I know. I love how they don't even wait until the year that the temporary tax expires before they start. They're like, you know what? We passed that 2 years ago. There's 4 more years left. Let's start talking about making it permanent now. Why wait, you know? All right, so the key no arguments. It's a very, very complicated thing for what ought to be. Like, I have that thing where money gets taken out of my check before I get it, and it goes into a savings account. And it's bonehead simple. Just a fixed amount goes into a savings account. That we can all. This isn't that. This is, like I said, lots of little plays with what money goes in, what it gets counted towards, how it gets counted towards education funding, how it gets counted towards the debt, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of fancy accounting footwork. It shifts power to the legislature, particularly from local schools. So again, the way these formulas get allocated, because remember, a certain percentage of all state spending has to go to schools. And so the perpetual budget game in Sacramento is, how do we count any chunk of dollars and whether or not that it counts in a category where a percentage has to go to schools or not? Because if it does count in a category where a percentage has to go to schools, then there's not as much money there, right? Whereas if you count it in a category where a percentage doesn't have to go to schools, then the whole amount is there. So gaming which money goes where is a constant process. In this case, the way they want to count the money that goes to schools has to do with debt, and it takes that decision-making authority back up to the state and away to schools over that particular stream of money. So, you know, it's another centralization. And then there isn't any money here, right? This is not new money. This is just how they're going to account for money that already exists in the budget. And so they argue, you know, if 1.5% has to go into the savings account or has to go to pay debt, they have to pay debt payments every year, right? Or else Moody's would downgrade us even more than we already are. So if you're counting this money towards the debt, they just won't pay this money towards the debt. So it's not obvious it'll increase our debt payments in any way. And I think that's fundamentally the story here. We've done a lot of rainy day funds in the past, starting, I think the first real heavy duty one was Paul Gann, way back in the Gann days, you know. So we've been trying this over and over. It turns out the legislature spends every single dime that comes in. It doesn't matter what it is supposed to go to, and they borrow some more every single budget cycle. That is it. So the idea that we save anything is ludicrous. We have not saved a single dime in the state budget of California in 20 years, not once. So we have 4 existing rainy day funds. They never, ever, ever not spend them. So creating this one is not going to be any different. This one, because it's so complex and has all these formulas, is clearly an accounting exercise designed to primarily mean more of the decision about where the money goes gets made by Sacramento and less by local school districts in particular, and it doesn't increase debt payments at all. Yeah.
For the local schools, it's my understanding that this proposition would basically not allow them to have reserves.
Right, right. And the reserves are now supposed to be at the state level. Right. So they're sucking that up to there, and then, but that means they get to control when the money goes out, right?
Would you say, I mean, this proposition is basically a vacuum deal with California Teachers Association and Governor Rush? Because
the debt that they're supposed to pay is supposed to be the pension liability, right? But they're already supposed to be paying that. So again, it doesn't create any new money going to the pension liabilities. All it does is take the reserves out of the local school. This is not all it does. One of the things it does, it takes the reserves away from the local schools, holds it at the state level, but since they're going to spend it all every year, it means when the schools need to dip into their reserves, they're going to go to the states and say, hey, we need more money this year because it's a recession. And the state will say, yeah, it's a recession. We don't have any money this year. Sorry. Oh, you mean we were supposed to save that? Yeah, well, we don't do that because we've never saved it. So without that little, without the shuffle. Yeah, if they just done a simple savings account formula, you know, it could have been something. I thought I saw someone else. Any other questions on this one?
So you let us know if you're supporting it and you're not.
I will not tell you whether to say yes or no. I will just give you facts and opinion. That's I work for a 501c3. I don't take positions on these things. All right, 45, health insurance. So this is Health Insurance Commissioner is going to now approve rate changes, pretty much all rate changes. I mean, very few exceptions, rate changes for all health insurance plans. This kind of complicated bundle of things, it took me a while to sort out, and then eventually what I figured out is they want to make the process of changing insurance rates a lot like, say, the process of updating the county land use plan or something like that, where you have a schedule of hearings. It has to go through certain bodies. People get a chance to weigh in. So it's like a rule-making process for a local government. But now that's going to apply to all health insurance company rate changes, so that there's this public participation process in the rate changes. It doesn't apply to the big employer group health programs. So this is really about individual health plans and small business health plans for whatever reason. And the last bullet is it basically takes prior coverage out of the equation in determining eligibility. So your health insurance companies can't take into account whether or not you've been a good health insurance customer in the past in determining whether they want to cover you. So the yes and arguments hinge, really around the cost of health insurance. We all know cost of health insurance has been going up. It's been a crazy, hard to figure out world in health insurance. That this will bring a lot more public participation into the decision about healthcare rates, and that it's a bad thing for health insurance companies to consider your prior coverage when determining whether to give you health insurance, and this will eliminate that. The no argument, the big one is this is the biggest centralization of health insurance regulation ever seen in the United States of America. It blows away Obamacare in that regard, because even Obamacare did not try to centralize at the federal level decisions as much as this does. This one guy, the insurance commissioner, well, our woman, is going to completely control all health insurance policy decisions in the state of California. I mean, they already control what can be offered, under what conditions it can be offered, and who can offer it. That's already up to the insurance commissioner. The only thing they don't control right now is how much they charge. This will give them control over that, which means it's 100% control of the health insurance market in the state of California. They say it'll increase costs and cause small employers in particular to drop coverage, because now there will be this carve out for the big employers. Individual health insurance plans are always in this special case zone. There's lots of extra complicated rules that apply there. Small employers then get squeezed out because they don't get either set of exemptions. It shifts health coverage basically from being health insurance to being a mandated public benefit. And insurance companies will pull out of the state. It is, in my opinion, a massive power grab by the insurance commissioner to actually control the entire insurance market in California. I don't see how, just based on, and this is interesting, again, having moved to Florida. Now, Florida has done some pretty weird things in regulating insurance as well, and has retrenched on some of that because so many insurance companies left the market. And California's experienced this before too. The last time we increased the power of the insurance commissioner, we lost about half of the companies that provided insurance in California. So I don't see how this happens and we don't lose a whole bunch of companies, which means lots of folks will be going through the process of looking for new insurance companies, and they'll be in a bad negotiation. It's a bad time to be having to move into new insurance. The fewer companies, they'll be a lot pickier, they'll be a lot more expensive, rates will go up. And it just, given the centralization of government control of healthcare that's already going on, this is just really doubles down. It's like California said, boy, that Obamacare business was just amateur hour. Why didn't they just take over the system? And so, you know what? California will be a leader once again. We will have the state take over the system entirely. And so, it seems like the outcome of this is that the massive shift of people out of private insurance and into the government-run insurance programs through one avenue or the other, Medicaid, Medicare, or one of the Obamacare exchange avenues, and however that's going to work. Because what nobody seems to be able to figure out is, how will this actually work with the Obamacare exchanges? Because if the companies are in those exchanges, but then they want to pull out of California because of this, how's that going to work? Well, I don't know. I haven't found anybody yet who can is enough of an insurance lawyer to sort that out for me. But let's just say there will be complications. So, less insurance and more expensive and fewer choices, that doesn't seem like a winner to me at all. Any questions on this one?
Yes vote means we don't want that.
No. Yeah, right. So approving this initiative will give all of this power to the insurance commissioner.
So the no vote takes it away.
Well, it doesn't exist now. So yeah, no vote just doesn't allow it to happen, right? Still have a very highly state-controlled insurance, but not completely state-controlled insurance as we have now. All right, medical regulations. So somewhat related. Prop 46 basically, it's the central thrust here is a set of new restrictions on or new regulatory oversight really of doctors. So it's drug and alcohol testing of doctors. It's right now, essentially, if for whatever reason you do identify a doctor who has alcohol or drug problems, the medical board doesn't take action until there has been a hearing and they have been found guilty. This measure would say no. The medical board stops them from practicing until they've been found innocent. Yeah, exactly. It requires the doctors. It requires doctors. So it makes. Let me put it this way: it makes doctors liable if they have knowledge that another doctor is drinking or doing drugs and doesn't tell on them. So it creates these. Anyway, mutual. It requires. This is kind of the big thing, the big new thing. I mean, these are sort of tweaks to the existing rules. It creates a new database into which all prescriptions go in California. And then when a doctor wants to give you a prescription for whatever, they're supposed to check that database and see, have you been going around getting prescriptions from lots of different doctors? They're supposed to use this database to identify people who are kind of abusing the prescription process, right? But it does mean that everybody's prescriptions go into this database that doesn't currently exist. And then the final thing, it makes increase right now. The maximum amount of pain and suffering damages that can be levied against a doctor's insurance plan when he does malpractice is $250K. It increases that amount. So apparently, drug and alcohol abuse by doctors is just out of control in California, say the yes folks. Doctors currently, they just look at you, determine whether you need a prescription or not, and they don't take into account whatever might have happened to you that's not in their file on you. And this database would allow them to do that. And $250,000 isn't enough of a negligence punishment, essentially, for doctors, and that needs to be increased. The no arguments is if you increase the cap on malpractice payouts, you increase the cost of malpractice insurance. And believe me, the doctor is not going to pay that. He is going to charge you for that. The prescription database is a brand new, huge database of every prescription you ever get in your life in California. Gosh, has any database ever been abused in the United States? Let me think. Just as long as it's not run by the IRS or the NSA, we're okay, right? So yeah, they say, you know, anybody who works in any doctor's office, so the receptionist or whatever can look up anybody they want, and you think that's never going to get used inappropriately? Probably. It'll cause more doctors than already leaving the state to leave the state. We already have an exodus going on and a lot of early retirements. And there's already basically a doctor who is doing the wrong. There's lots of controls on malpractice by doctors already. This is sort of, again, that sort of prevent. Well, we're going to try to head it off at the pass by increasing oversight of doctors before they actually do anything wrong. So the first thing I thought of is I'm really skeptical of this drug and alcohol abuse is widespread among doctors. I've asked around. I haven't met a person yet who's even heard of a doctor from a friend of a friend who became a drunk or a drug abuser and people didn't trust him anymore and quit going. I mean, has anybody heard of that? I mean, if it's that much of a problem, wouldn't somebody in this room have had a brother, sister's, cousin's mother who went to a bad doctor or something? None of us have heard of it. I'm pretty sure it's not a huge problem. And what works better? Your choice of doctors and everything you hear about doctors from your friends and family, or some state regulator randomly checking on doctors? I mean, I personally trust the knowledge of my friends and family about a given doctor and my experience with them way more than I trust this nonsense. 1/3 of doctors, I mean, there's been, I can't even lost count of how many surveys there's been that show so many doctors are leaving due to all the changes mostly due to Obamacare, but there's a lot of other things going on. And so a lot of doctors are like, yeah, I don't have to work till 65 because I'm making good money. I can retire at 55. And so a lot of early retirements going on. A lot of people, so there's doctors leaving California because other states are much nicer to work in. And then there's early retirements. I mean, doctors are going to start getting scarce. And then we already talked about the database and the narking thing. I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. Bad incentives that are going to create ill will and abuses. So any questions on that one? Yeah?
So the no vote allows the state to check?
No. Yes vote is to create this new system
Yes vote
of,
creates
yeah.
it. So the no vote takes
The no vote says, no, let's leave the doctors the way they are. Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds like with this requiring other doctors to tell on each other, does that kind of create a sense where if one gets caught, then everybody around it could be in trouble because they didn't tell? Oh, do you know kind of thing?
Well, it gets me thinking about, just like we do with drug dealers, when the cop catches one, you don't arrest him. You let him keep doing business and start telling you about others. So it's like when a doctor comes to you and you're the state regulator, you say, you know what? Just lay low and keep feeding me. So we're going to have all these doctor informants and, then what's going to be their incentive, is it going to be patient care or is it going to be keeping in business? Because the regulators say, look, you share an office with Joe. We've got an informant that says Joe is doing cocaine. So you had to know that. You had to know that because you share an office with him. So you're going, under this law, you're going down for not telling us about it unless you tell us about it. Right? So, yeah, exactly. So, I predict ridiculousness and doctors saying, yeah, I'm out. I'm not going to put up with that. Having to worry, now you share an office with 5 other doctors, you got to worry about one of them maybe one of them is having trouble at home or going through a divorce and is just pissed off, and I mean, who knows? Or you have an argument over how the money is spent, or paying for an upgrade to the building, and they say, okay, fine, I'll just tell the regulators about this guy, and then he doesn't have any say over how we divide the money anymore. It can't be good. All right, we gotta go move on. Criminal sentencing. This is an adjustment to some of the sentencing requirements that are already in the California law. So this basically says, look, right now there's a bunch of non-violent minor drug offenses that are prison required, felony prison sentences. It shifts a lot of those to misdemeanors. It shifts petty crimes, so things like writing a bad check, or shoplifting, or receiving stolen goods. So basically paying somebody, buying a bicycle on Craigslist that turns out to be stolen, things like this when you might have known it was stolen. These petty crimes that are currently imprisonment, even when they're not associated with other crimes. And then it allows resentencing of people who are currently in prison for those specific things. And it applies all the savings to mental health and school programs.
They say.
Yeah, they say, yeah. The key yes arguments is that this will save a lot of money. We all know our prison system is now run by the federal government. It's a disaster, and a very expensive disaster. This will shift some of these really small-time crooks out of the prison system and into parole and probation and other forms of punishment. Shifts the money that is being spent on that to education and mental health, and won't reduce punishment for serious criminals. The provisions are that if you write a bad check but you've been in jail before, then you're not a petty criminal. You're a repeat offender. That this law doesn't apply to you. It's for first offender, minor offenses, non-violent minor offenses. Key no arguments is that anytime you reduce the punishment for any crime, you might get more of that crime. So we might get more bad check writing, more shoplifting if the punishment isn't prison, but instead is a misdemeanor. Not punishing small offenses will lead to criminals doing bigger crimes. So the latter effect, right? If people are able to get off with a misdemeanor for writing bad checks, they'll go ahead and rob a bank. And it'll put more criminals back on the street because we have some people in prison for writing bad checks and shoplifting who can now go to the courts and say, under this law, can I get parole or probation instead? So that's the essence of it. First thing is, thanks to the overcrowding in our prisons and the federal government taking over, one of the first things they did was take a lot of these people and put them out already. So very few people in the system now could apply to be released under this law because they've already been released by the federal judge running the system, because that was the most obvious people to let out. If you got overcrowding, you got to let people out. The people who never did anything violent that you know of are the first ones you let out, right? And they're trying to keep all the ones who did violent things in. And I think a big part of this is the reason why our prison system is overcrowded is because incrementally, in little bits and pieces, we've passed a lot of laws. Mostly, here's what we do. You know how complex these ballot initiatives are? Even this one a little bit, though this doesn't do this, but we pass, when we passed 3 strikes was a good thing for the most part, when it focuses on real hardcore violent repeat offenders. But there was a ton of other language in there that it wound up affecting a lot of people that none of us would think of would be a 3-striker. And in every felony ballot measure we've approved, that's been the case. So in the details, you get a lot of these straggler offenses, and you wind up with thousands of people in prison for things that are not what we would consider to be, there's got to be, again, if you wrote a bad check, surely there's effective ways to punish a bad check writer besides putting them in prison. Compared to, especially if you don't have enough room in your prisons for the guy who does rob a bank. I think we got to prioritize that. So and one consequence of that is California spends among the least in the nation on any other form of punishment. So we just don't bother with things besides prison anymore in California. Prison is all we do. So we're pretty lousy compared to a lot of other states at other forms of punishment. And frankly, we need to get better at that and figure out ways to punish people besides prison, much, much lower cost and much more effective. Yeah.
Some of those items would be.
There. No, that's at the other end. We're really lousy at executing. Yeah, it's kind of funny. We're horrible at dealing with petty criminals, and we're horrible at dealing with people who should be executed. And the only thing we can do well is lock up, like people who maybe aren't quite at the execution level, but clearly need to be locked up for a long time. Yeah, that's the one thing we kind of got right. So trying to carve those out. Yeah, cleaning out the higher end of the system would be a huge help, but cleaning out the lower end of the system is crucial here. So there's a number of things. So a lot of it is real restrictive parole and probation with real oversight. We have a very undermanned, underfunded system here where it's not as much of a punishment as it should be because there's so little oversight that you can get away with a lot that you shouldn't be able to get away with. I mean, that's not universally true. I would say being in one of those systems still is pretty sucky here, but it's not punishment, but it should be more. But more important is the programs that go with these things. If you want to, punishment is part, it's just like your kids. It's apple and carrot, right? Punishment is part of how you keep them from doing things, but also making sure that life is good when they do good things. And we don't, it's education, it's childcare, it's jobs, it's all of the things that we know reduce recidivism that keep people from moving up that elevator of crimes and so forth. And again, we're in the top tier on recidivism rates in the United States. So we have more repeat offenders pretty much than any other state. There's a few others that are pretty close to us, but it's not a club we want to be in.
Well, Dr. Moore,
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Is there a state, in your opinion, that has a program that obviously nothing's perfect, but is showing more effectiveness?
Yeah, the most fair comparison in a way is Texas because of the size and scale and everything. But Texas isn't the best at it. They're just way better than California. But states that are really particularly good at this, actually Nevada is pretty good in terms of a neighbor. Florida is actually also pretty good, also a pretty large state. So there are a lot of, Florida's recidivism rate is half of California's. Okay, it's almost as big of a state. They've got a huge immigrant population, lots of basic things similar to California. Half the recidivism rate in their prison system. And they don't spend a ton more than California does on recidivism reduction, they just do more. Yeah.
My understanding from this proposition is, though, that it's going to take anything that now is a felony, it will be a misdemeanor as long as it's like less of what, $900. So if somebody goes in and they steal something, a handgun, say for instance, and it's worth $500, it's going to be a misdemeanor. I don't want that.
Right. It doesn't apply to weapons. So there's, yeah. I mean, well, that's a good question. I would love to have the lawyer parse that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have a real problem with.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I don't want to not punish these crimes.
I don't want to water down.
Right.
My son works in the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
So we've already got enough of them out on the street.
Yeah.
And
yeah, but we always got enough of them in the prison too, so it's
yeah.
trying to find the right balance.
By
Yeah.
the same token, I think if they've done a crime, just because it used to be a felony, I don't know. I hate to see us take and put everything under a misdemeanor now. If it's. I
think I am with you on that. I mean, my wife's a former LAPD officer. Getting these punishments right is the crucial thing, and I think
there should be maybe some other things.
I think
but to just
I mean, mostly I like this one because I think they do a pretty good job of trying to make sure that they're not repeat offenders. They haven't ever been tied to another violent crime, and they did a very small crime in this case. And then it's not that they don't get punished. I mean, misdemeanor punishments can still be jail time, just not prison time. You can still do jail time. You can still do lots of time in various programs. So it can be real punishment. I mean, hopefully the judges will not do dumb things with it.
Why is it then that the local, well, I can't speak for other counties, but our local sheriffs and department, DA, et cetera, is not for this bill?
Yeah, well, they universally don't support any reductions in, yeah.
I just wanted to add, and I think it can help clarify. We were talking, you mentioned realignment, and we had a lot of criminals that were released when the federal government took over the position. What happened here locally is we lost out on that funding.
Yeah.
North and the South grabbed it, so we have a much more difficult time in the valley dealing with these low-level criminals. We don't have the funding for mental health, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, this is my opinion, I believe that's why our district attorney came, to us to oppose the bill, because our situation is a little different in the valley. I hope that's...
Yeah, they did. The realignment is classic, where they distributed a lot of these people either into the local prison jail systems or released them under supervision, and then they didn't allocate the money by head count. If they'd done, okay, here's $5,000 per person, and it goes, we sent 100 people to Kern County gets 100 times 5,000. No, they sent 100 people here, and they gave us the money for 15 because LA said, well, it's much more expensive in LA than it is in Kern County, so you got to give us double the money. And state legislature said, well, since we're all LA legislators here, we say thumbs up to that. The classic Sacramento redistribution scheme there.
But I think that includes burglary as well, as long as it's less than $950.
But I believe it's not if a person isn't involved.
Yeah, no, yeah.
If you're stealing from a person individually,
right?
And there's a
anything involving, it's petty crimes. If you break into a house, if you mug a person, it defines the crimes as, like I say, it's shoplifting, check kiting, receiving stolen goods are the main categories. All right, so the last one. The weirdest one. Every year when we have a big bundle of initiatives, seems like there's always one kind of oddball, and this one's definitely an oddball. So this basically ratifies 2 tribes gaming compacts, meaning the legal contract structure deal that the tribe has with the state, regulating and permitting a casino to be built. That's what this is all about, 2 casinos being built. It exempts some of the projects related to building those casinos from the CEQA. Yes, arguments are building casinos makes tons of jobs. It'd be great for these areas. This package has been through the local governments, all layers, and the state legislature. It's been approved all the way up by all the elected representatives involved, and that it'll be a source of revenue for the tribe, which has a lot of poor folks that could use the resources. The no arguments is, once upon a time, we passed a Proposition 1A, a couple of iterations of 1A ago, that said, okay, look, Indian gaming things are going to play, here's the set of rules they've got to play by. This is an initiative to say, well, we want to do these 2 projects that don't play by those rules, so we have to get the voters' approval. It allows casinos on lands that's really stretching the concept of being part of the reservation. They're not actually on the existing tribal lands, but they've worked some deal to sort of buy that land and then claim that it's now part of their land. And it'll encourage more of this, that it will, Indian tribes up and down the state will have a big incentive to go try to make a special deal to get a casino for themselves as well. Okay, so the first thing that struck me about this is how crazy is it that we have a ballot initiative, statewide ballot initiative, to approve 2 building projects nowhere near 90% of the voters of the state of California. Like, really, what does this matter to anybody here? So we're all voting on this thing. It's got nothing to do with us, really. I mean, indirectly it does, like all such changes. But it's a weird initiative in that respect. We don't often see this. And then the big thing is all of this hinges on whether, if you think casinos are inherently evil and they've got to be tightly controlled, then then approving this would make no sense. If you're like, why are we having a big statewide repel-depel over casinos, which is sort of my thing. I think, you know, whether or not to build a casino is like whether or not building any entertainment venue, a water park, or anything else. Either it meets local zoning codes and gets approved by the county commission or the city council or whatever, or it doesn't. And there, you know, I don't see any reason. Yeah.
Allow a lot of that, which is going to directly affect people.
It could be, but only if everybody approves it. Like, so that means they can come right now to the city of Bakersfield and make this pitch and try to do this. There's nothing preventing them. There's a 1A route they could do it, or they could do this route. If this approves, this might mean it's more likely to do something like this. And so they could go to the city and say, well, look, this got approved in this case, so maybe it'll get approved in this case. So sign on, and we'll go up the chain of command, and we'll eventually, you know, get state approval, and then we'll run a ballot initiative. So again, if you think casinos are bad, you shouldn't like this. If you don't think casinos are a problem, then this doesn't make any sense. So then I should say, if you think casinos are not a problem, then why not approve this? If these communities want the casinos, the Indians want the casinos, all the elected representatives have approved it, it's passed everywhere that it actually involves. The only reason for us to vote no is that camel's nose under the tent argument. So, any other questions on that one?
I think my concern would be is the casinos we currently have, non-Indian casinos, are highly regulated,
right,
and follow zoning, planning, and other regulations. My concern would be the Indian casinos claim exemption by federal statute that they are not regulated by any zoning ordinances and things, which could open them to being wherever they want. I think they tend to claim that at this point in time. So.
Yeah, but it hasn't worked. I mean, the reason why we're voting on this, if they're exempt under federal law, we wouldn't be voting on this, right? They could just do it, and they can't. They have to have zoning approval. They have to pay taxes. None of those things have turned out to be true. They tried that route. They tried to get the federal government to give them pretty much carte blanche on tribal lands, and the federal government said, no, that wasn't part of the original deal, and we're not going to allow that. Now, they've built a number of casinos. Certainly, you can see several of them down in Palm Springs, for example, but they're all under HERA. I had a really interesting meeting once with some folks from HERA's. It was about a land use thing, but one of the things I learned from that is that, you know, they've got a casino in Palm Springs that's a tribal casino under all this. The legal system, in a sense, is completely different from the ones they have in Las Vegas, but the regulators are the same regulators. So,
just
you know.
Giggles, where are these casinos planning to be?
They're up in Northern California. They're both up in kind of I don't actually know the exact look. One's between Fresno and Stockton, and one's Madera. Okay, where's the other one?
I'm not sure.
I think the other one's a little bit further north, like up between Stockton and Sacramento somewhere, but they're both up there. So, and Madera you could drive to if it's a nice one. I don't know.
Well, they all like, what is it, the Fresno Two-Mish that has their own SWAT team now that goes in and shuts them down?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody has their own SWAT team now. All right, well, that's all the initiatives. Thanks. Appreciate all the questions.